let me have its little presentation. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We hope to have an exciting session today here with you. We expect a lot of questions. We expect a lot of questions from you today, so be ready, don't be shy. If you don't make questions, we shall make questions to you, so you decide. I'm very glad to introduce today my colleagues. As you have seen the title, Using Data, Making Sense of Industry Trends. You know that our profession is quite complex and difficult to grasp, so we have a lot of information to collect for the future, and sometimes we don't know if this information is true, is correct. What have we been doing in these years, in this period? Trying to gather data and to provide you with this information. What is the best way to provide data, to provide information with data, is doing surveys. So today we are presenting two surveys. One is made by EUATC together with other important associations, ELIA, FIT, GALA, and we are just presenting it in a short format because it would take a longer time to introduce it. And we shall also have an introduction, a presentation of the survey made by Tekom. Tekom is the German association, the biggest association in Europe, European Association of the Technical Communicators. I will let, of course, the speakers to introduce themselves and to introduce their association and what they do. So on my right we have Rudy TIRRY, the president of EUATC. I'm a little bit shy because being the vice president to interview the president of the same association. Okay. Then on my right also Miss Annette SCHILLER. Annette SCHILLER has a super curriculum vitae. She is, I read because I don't want to say stupid things, freelance translator and chair of the Europe Regional Center of the International Federation of Translators, FIT Europe. I was looking at the diplomas, PhD in Translation Studies and a degree in Legal Studies. She has been teaching on the MA in Translation Studies at Dublin City University, which is a member of DMT network. Annette with me will be moderating this session. She will be very kind with thousands of questions, so be prepared. If you don't make questions, she will be interrogating you. On my left side, Mr. Michael Fritz, the president of Tekom. He will introduce himself also. And Daniela STRAUB, she's also an important help member of Tekom. So I would like to start with maybe Rudy TIRRY is okay for you with the survey? Yes, please. We'll have some slides to show.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have to do it from here. Sorry for that, because there's no clicker to move the slides. So, okay, welcome everybody. This is a short presentation about, not necessarily about the language industry survey that we're running itself, but more about the background of it and why we do it and why we do it in the way that that we're doing it. So first, one minute about EUATC itself. We are an umbrella association, a federation, very much like FIT for on the translator side. We're the European umbrella association for translation companies. So it's not companies that are member of EUATC, it's national associations. Each country has one association that is member of EUATC. Today, 21 countries are represented, and EUATC was indeed the initiator of this survey back in 2013, and we've been doing it ever since. Why are we running surveys? Mirko already said something about it. Actually, we're trying to get to gather data to determine what we need to do. And the "we" is a complex word because it can be government, it can be institutions like DGT, for instance. It can be businesses, companies, it can be individual translators, it can be academia, university professors who need to know what they need to teach, for instance. And you always need this information from the audience, from the general public. But we can group the things that we're gathering in 3 layers, I would say. The top layer is policy, to define in which direction the industry should go. Should we promote certain things or not? The biggest part is probably business. You've probably all seen already quite a lot of surveys in our industry. There's a kind of a proliferation of surveys, sometimes too many. And most of them are focused on business. And then you have operational. How do we do our work exactly? And there's part of that in most of the surveys as well, but most of the focus of the surveys is on the business side. Now you can look at data in 2 different ways. Either you are asking for facts, and then you're asking for what's happening today. How does the industry look like today? What are we doing today? How are we doing things today? Or you can ask for the future. You can ask for opinions. You can ask for expectations. You can ask for concerns. All those are very subjective. They're very difficult to analyze. They're very difficult to evaluate, see what is the value of these opinions. But nevertheless, they're very useful to determine where the industry can be going. And if you are, for instance, a business person, you're not that much interested in what is happening today. You want to know where you want to lead your company in the years from now. And therefore, is it possible to or is it useful, for instance, to open an office in that faraway country? Or where do I situate myself in this whole landscape? We've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions lately in our industry, probably because certain people have made some strategic choices based on information that they've gathered about the market. But these surveys also serve us to answer other questions. I believe you have a clicker there. That's great. Like, for instance, for universities, for them it's important, for instance, to know what kind of languages need to be taught. And that can change, the economy is changing, but at the university level, I don't see much changes. It comes very late, and the evolution in the market has already gone on for a while in the meantime. So you have quite a lot of questions that you can answer with the information that you're gathering. Okay? No? Oops. Now it's blocked. Nope.
And you usually try it block the site.
Okay. You try and repair it. Actually, when we're looking at the many services that are run in our industry, who of you have already filled in these such services? Oh, very few. That's strange, actually, because you normally get bombarded with them. It means that you move them to the spam folder or something like that. Actually, it shouldn't, because it does help. It does help the whole industry to determine what's living in the industry. And if you're in a company, then definitely it will determine whether you will be helping, giving data to determine if you are yourself in the ballpark, as we call that, or not. When you're looking at the surveys that you will receive, undoubtedly, you will notice that you have two kinds. One is the type that is asking you for these very specific data. They will be asking you for like productivities, wages, turnover and profits and things like that. Thank you. Okay. And they are coming from, most of them are coming from national associations of translators or of translation companies. And you find them in all countries. And on top of that, there are two commercial organizations, global. One is very well known, which is Common Sense Advisory. It's been doing that for years. And recently a newcomer has been created called NIMSI, doing largely the same thing. The important thing is that they are creating what we would call benchmarking surveys. And these benchmarking surveys serve to help companies, usually, to determine if they are competitive at this moment and to compare themselves to the competition. The one that I'm talking about here is something different. It is a combined effort of, although EUATC started it, in the meantime, ELIA, GALA, FIT, even DGT through the EMT and the LINT networks have joined the effort. And this one has a different focus. The focus here is not on fact-finding. The focus is on determining what the concerns and the expectations and the opinions of the industry are. And we're not only looking at translators and translation companies, we're also asking the opinion, like from academia, like from people working inside a company in a translation role, a translator role, for instance, to see what the differences are between the different roles of these people. Since we're doing it since 2013, and we're always asking, at least for part of the survey, always asking the same questions, it allows us to identify trends. And that is one of the main purposes of this survey, is to identify these trends on very specific and important parts, like market evolution, sales evolution, sales price evolution, competition evolution, things like that. As you can see here on this slide, the first 3 years were limited to only translation companies. And you see that the return, the responses is quite flat. That is because there's just a number of translation companies that are active in this sort of activity. Why it started to grow in the 3 last years is because there came a much bigger response from the individual translators. And as you all know, there's many more individual translators than companies. So this is growing rapidly thanks to the support of FIT. And that helps us a lot also to identify differences in opinion between the companies and the individual translators. Although there is a lot of commonality between both segments, but obviously there's differences as well. I'm not going to go into the details of the results of the survey because we're at the end of the year. The new survey is coming out, is starting in January, so watch out for that. The results of the survey have already been published many times and by all the participating organizations. They're public, so you can go on the websites and get the full report. But this is, for instance, an example of what we're trying to do. We're trying to map expectations and reality. We're asking for instance, staff evolution. Are you hiring? Will you hire next year, or will you let people go? We're not asking for absolute figures there, just your expectations. What are you think you're going to do? And then the next year we will ask you, what did you do last year? And we map these two things together, and actually we see some very interesting trends there on how the industry reacts on the reality of the figures of last year, and how they adapt their behavior for next year, for instance. We ask for, or we analyze market sentiment per country, based on investment and disinvestment plans or opinions. These are always things that need to be taken with a lot of salt, as we normally say, because these are opinions and expectations. They can be used as a guideline, but this does not mean that you don't need to do, if you want to base your own plans on it, does not mean that you don't need to do your own research, obviously. As you can see in this one, last year or this year, early this year, situation looks very nice. Almost everything is green, while in previous years we had quite a lot of yellow and even some red situations, which is kind of alarming, because it means that a lot of people are planning to leave the industry. So here we're seeing that a lot of people are investing in the industry, which is a good thing. Today, what we're focusing on is the main thing. The core is the market evolution and the development plans of the companies. What we've added in over the years is parts on technology, parts on resources, parts on the concerns and the challenges that companies and translators are facing. Now as I said, in January we will do the new one, and we're discussing now what we're going to change, because obviously certain questions that we're asking yield results that we could have come up with without running the survey. That's one of the things, an interesting fact of surveys. Sometimes they confirm your expectations, sometimes they don't. They contradict expectations. Those questions, okay, we've asked them, we've seen the results. We may not have to ask them again in the next edition. And then it's the question, what else? What other data do we want to gather? And that is also one of the questions I think that moderators will ask you, for instance, what is the kind of information that the audience saw, and that translators, the professors, the translation companies want to have, and that they don't find yet in the results of the current surveys. And I want to end here because I think that there's much more detailed information also in the Tekom survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rudy. I recommend you to download the survey on the website. You can find it in the EUATC website, or I think also ELIA website probably you will find there. And it's a quite complex survey. And for the first for the first time in these years, we are starting to have data. Up to 6-7 years ago, we didn't have so much data. Now we are starting really to have something more complete a little bit. Okay, I'll give the floor to Michael and Daniela.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Fritz. Please call me Michael if you like. Daniela, my colleague, Daniela STRAUB, both of us work for Tekom, which is the European Society for Technical Communication. Daniela told me to do the presentation, basically, and talk, because she thinks I like public speaking more than she does. I'm not sure whether that's true, but I start, and if I have questions, I will ask her, and you can ask her, of course, because she's the expert. I'm only the speaker. She did the survey. She did the survey, and she is wonderful with working with SPSS. You know maybe what that is. I was not good at mathematics, so and I failed the statistics course in political science. So all these details she can answer better than I can. Okay, so what are we? We are a membership-based organization. We have 9,500 members in Europe. Well, traditionally, most of our members are in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But we are extending our scope in Europe. We have two main fields of activities. The one field is to develop the technical field of technical communication. That means we are involved a lot in, for instance, standardization processes on international level. Daniela is on standardization boards. I am, and we try to develop the field and the art further for the sake of our members, but also for the sake of customers who have to use products and need information related to these products. This is the first field of activity. The second is Tekom has developed the job profile of technical writer or technical communicator in Europe. We have been doing this for many years. We have lots of commissions and working groups on this. Recently, Daniela managed a project called what was it?
Tekom Frame.
Tekom Frame. We have developed an academic framework for the education of technical communicators at on university level. We also have a more general description of skills and competencies needed for technical writers, and we introduced these skills and competencies also in ESCO, where in the meanwhile translators are also represented, to say that. Okay, so these are our main interests: developing the field of technical communication further and promoting the job profile of people who work there. And of course, in technical communication, we have many technical translators. The translators themselves, we have project managers for translation, and we have experts for language technologies who work together with technical writers. And so it's of interest for us to also have data about what translators are doing, and about the relationship and the collaboration of translators and technical communicators. Okay, so this is what I'm going to speak about. We have also a publication. It's in German language only at the moment. I'm sorry to say that, but we will translate it later. So if you want to have it, you can order it at our office. The goals of the survey, maybe I have to make clear, when we speak about industry, we have a different concept of what industry is. Here amongst you, when you talk about industry, you mean the so-called language industry. I must say, I myself don't know what that is. When I talk about industry, I mean producers of or manufacturers of products, software manufacturing companies, and service companies that offer services. And for me, technical writing and translating is an underlying service, and it's not an industry of itself. But this is a nice discussion for long evenings. But we are, what we think of ourselves is we are industry focused, because we want to find out what is good for our members. Our members are work in all industry sectors, and so it's important for us to provide information to them about different topics. In this case, it was information about the translation process. Usually, our members have 11 different information products which they produce, and normally, on an average, they translate it into 13 languages. And 46% of technical communication-related documentation is translated into more than 10 languages. So it's very important for them. Another thing is from the point of view of standardization, ISO 17100 has a lot of requirements regarding the quality of translations, but there's also IEC 82079 Part 1 of 2012. And this standard formulates special requirements for technical translation. It says, where instructions for use are translated from the original language into others, expert translators or specialists shall be responsible for the translation, including checking and proofreading, who should have basic competence in communication, particularly technical communication, and be familiar with the subject area. So this is the more narrow requirement for technical translators, which is important to our members, because our members, our figures show us that more than 45% of our members work with this standard. So the question for them is, of course, what are qualified technical translators? Okay, so then the topics and the random sampling. As I already mentioned, we are focused on the customer side of translation services. We are the buyers. Our members buy translation services from LSPs and individual translators. And in our survey, we had 767 persons of how many, Daniela? What? You did it in March this year, right?
In March,
yeah. And how? And we do the main survey is about technical communication. How many people participated in this one?
Round about the same number.
Round about the same number, okay. So, and that means these 767 individuals are from different sectors, industry sectors, according to my definition of what industry is. And it's always interesting to make it a distinction between manufacturers, software companies, and service companies. In this case here, service provider means companies that provide technical writing services to industry companies. It's not like banking also, it's really service vendors for technical writing. Then what's also very interesting, you can see here how many languages our members usually have to deliver. In many cases, it's more than 12 languages in one instance. For instance, the big car makers, when they ship a new car, a new version of the car, they have normally 35 languages to serve in the moment when they ship the new car worldwide. Then translation volumes. It's amazing how many translations they have to deliver from the volume side, and it's also amazing what they have to pay for it. That comes later. The decision-making process for buying a translation is also a critical field. As you can see here, most of our members have to cooperate or work together with the purchase department when they buy translation services. And only 38% have, or 39% nearly have the privilege to make the decisions on their own. So when we later talk about quality requirements and so on, that makes a big difference, of course, whether the department buys the translation or the purchase department does. Then what is very interesting is also the criteria after which they buy translations. Most important, interestingly, is quality. Then the competence of the service provider, and then comes the volume of translations which can be handled. But you can see the third, this here, the third but last here says, provider translates from and into many languages. This is a very big argument for our members. They want to select service vendors that can cover all the languages which they have to ship. So this is one of the findings here. The next interesting thing is requirements regarding translation systems. Of course, every industry company wants you, the translators, to use translation memories. And terminologies. Terminology is very important. We can see that with each question we ask where terminology is mentioned, and basically companies, if they have a good process, they want the translator to use terminal databases as well. Okay, then methods or methodologies, data exchange, there are different options, but still most of them use email or FTP servers, which are a little outdated. The portals and cloud solutions don't show these big not these big numbers. Even nowadays, when we talk a lot about Internet of Things and everything and the cloud, this is obviously the reality. Then, which is very astonishing, we had a discussion with Rudy yesterday evening, the percentage of machine translation. An average of 6.2 of our members say they do machine translation. But we are not sure why they say that. Maybe they don't know what machine translation is. Maybe they don't know of whether they do it or their company does it or not. Or maybe they don't know whether their LSP does it. Maybe the LSP uses machine translation and they even don't know it. But the number is extremely low, and it's surprising for me, I must say. Because, on the other hand, I know from many department managers that they are very much into experimenting with DeepL and other neural machine translation machines. And I would say in 3 to 5 years, most of them will be using machine translation and not human translation anymore. But this is a process in the moment which is very difficult to describe with empirical data. That would be another challenge. Okay, but this is what they told us. Okay, then the percentage of post-editing, this correlates a little bit with the question regarding machine translation. Post-editing is quite low. Okay, then this is what people wish, what our members would like to have. And I must say, this is interesting, and it's, first of all, bad news for freelance translators, because as you can see, in reality here, at the moment, our members are working with 12.6% of our members are working with freelance translators. But if we ask them what is the ideal situation, only 6.7% say they would like to work with freelance translators. And you can see that on the other, on the baseline here, that 60.3%, and it's similar with what they wish, of them work with LSPs, with companies, bigger companies. And the other figure which is interesting, our members would like to work more with internal language service providers. You can see that in reality they work with 5.4 of them have internal language services, but here you can see that 12.5% would rather wish to have an internal language service, and 17.8 work with internal translators, and 27.9 would like to have internal translators. I really know companies, technology companies, who employ 2, 3, 4 translators full-time who do the translations for them exclusively, because they don't serve that many markets. If maybe there's a certain tendency when companies don't serve that many markets, it can be more cost-effective and time-effective for them to work directly with internal translators. Okay. So, next finding, the requirements regarding the quality. That's also an interesting topic, because as you can see, most companies don't need very high quality, they just need good quality, high quality. Some years ago, we had another survey, Daniela, I don't remember when we did it, where we asked how many percent, how much quality do you need? And the average answer was 80%. So this is a little Pareto-like. So you don't want to spend too much money for the last 10 or 20% of quality. So for most companies, maybe 80%, whatever that is okay. And this shows here a little bit again when you watch these figures. Then when we weigh up quality with other requirements, it's interesting. Quality is on top, then the duration of the translation processes comes second, and then comes the costs. So cost is not the biggest driver, but it's very close. 18.7 to 20.7 is very close. So maybe it's a combination of the three that is important for buying decisions. Okay, then quality assurance measures. It's interesting. It's here the most often quality assurance is just the self-check by the translator, what they require. And 4I principle is following up with 51%. So that shows, if I'm correct, that 50% of our companies are not following 17,100, because that would require 4I's principle, maybe. Yeah? But that's also a very interesting political discussion again. And here, because this is kind of a little bit of my hobby, you can see terminology ranked third, correct terminology 48%, and above that, a consistent terminology 42%. This is a very core thing for our members. And when we talk about machine translation, maybe this is one of the big issues with NMT, that as for now, you cannot enforce NMT machines to use your terminology database. This is a problem which is not solved for the reliability of the translations. Okay. Then here, that's a little complicated. The professional qualifications required from translators, from the point of view of our members. On the left pane, we have the current situation, on the right, the ideal situation. And you can see here some interesting things. To start on top, a different course of study with a foreign language component is not so good, obviously, because half of our members would really see a smaller number of different courses of study. What is important as well, different linguistic studies are also not so interesting. Then native speakers without training in translation are also not so interesting. In the ideal situation, our members would wish other things. They would wish, here you can see that, where is it? You would see studies in technical communication plus language competencies would be rated way higher. And what you can see here on the bottom line, a native speaker with training in translation is the most desired person. And so this is, of course, something we will have to we will have to discuss further when it comes to our own considerations of how to develop curricula further and things like that. Okay, competencies of translators. Okay, here we have some findings about the relationship between translators and technical communicators, and the qualification of translators in technical communication. TC is the abbreviation for technical communication. As you can see here, it's very important that technical translators have a knowledge about technical communication. Okay, that's simple. Then cooperation is very important from the point of view of our members, and that's already that is it. What our members want, our members have to handle very high volumes. They spend a lot of money on translation. In the process, they prioritize high but not super high quality. They want qualified employees because they are the critical success factor for them. Many translators work in the field of technical communication. This is a field where you can find jobs, and a lot of jobs at the moment, and make good money, more than in other fields. So far, there is no specific training for technical translators that prepares them for the task, and so many of them are kind of self-made or have learned on the job. About half of our respondents think that a special training in technical translation would be ideal for a technical translator. Okay, I think I can conclude with this and give the floor to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this excellent presentation. We loved it. And as you have seen, there are a lot of specific data on the expectation of what are the customers. Because, as you know very well, we are used to talk among us about the translation industry sector, but sometimes we don't have the taste of the situation from the other side. Sometimes the customers don't want to tell, sometimes they are shy, etc. So not that easy. While you think to some questions to prepare, I have a first question for one of the masters statisticians of the EUATC and Gala survey. And so I would address Mr. Nino Platel, who is here among us, with a specific question starting from that. Which have been the biggest pitfalls or the biggest complexity into organizing the data for the survey?
I'm not sure I understand you correctly, but I think you really mean the analyzing of the data. Well, very specifically for me, as I have been a statistician in official statistics, and there we have a completely different situation. We know the universe. We know, in fact, all companies that have some sort of activity. We subdivide that population based on certain characteristics, and we collect data from that. So we know exactly where we're taking our data from. In this context, you prepare a survey, and you try to find the respondents. In that respect, I also have a remark concerning the last presentation. You were referring to a random sample. Statistically seen, this is not a random sample. In a random sample, you know, again, the total population, and based on certain characteristics, you define which ones should be in your sample, and you try to take care that all different aspects of the population are included in your sample in the way they are also present in the population itself. If you have a survey based on the internet, it's in fact the respondent himself that defines, I am going to respond. That can also have a certain specific effect. You can give a respondent, for example, a platform to complain. He has, if you ask customers about how satisfied are you with the service that I provided to you, there is a tendency that those respondents who are not satisfied fill in the survey because they have, by that they have a platform. The ones that are completely satisfied, oh, that's okay, I'm not going to respond. So that's the main difficulty in defining what type of respondents do we have included and which ones are not included. The data that we are collecting from the respondents in our survey, is this really representative for the whole population? And in fact, we do not know.
Yes, maybe Rudy can reply, and also maybe Michael after.
Yeah, totally true, you know. And if you read the report, you will see that at the start of the report there is a caution telling you also from which countries, for instance, we had a representative number of replies, because that is another aspect. Since this language industry surveys run. Was oriented towards Europe. We did get also a number of replies from outside Europe, like one reply from Australia and things like that. Obviously, these things are not; these results are not representative. But it's not only for those countries; it's also for certain countries in Europe where we know that there are, for instance, something like at least 50 translation companies. in that country, and you get only 5 replies from translation companies. It's hard to draw any conclusions on only 10%. For quite a number of countries, however, the response was sufficiently high to draw these conclusions. For another number, not high enough. What you said about the tendency of complainers to fill in surveys faster than the other ones is totally true. If you look at the survey, if you participated in the survey, you will see that there's a number of open questions. And actually, those open questions are exactly there to invite complaints and to open the floor to people, to give them their candid opinion, not by structuring too much, not by pre-chewing the answers, by giving them choices, which we normally do in surveys to facilitate analysis. These open answers give us a deeper view of opinions, how strong the feelings are, for instance. That was for us valuable information. They're awfully difficult to analyze because you need to put these things somewhere in categories. But nevertheless, it gives us very good tendencies also of opinions, like about machine translation. We've seen the opinions about machine translation evolve over the last 3 years, through not just in the answers about how do you use machine translation, yes or no, for instance. That's an easy one to analyze, and you get a percentage out of that. Which may be wrong or false, but wrong or right, but it doesn't give you any more information than that. When we ask the question, what do you see as biggest challenges? Machine translation typically ends up as number 1 or number 2. Usually number 1 is price pressure. But machine translation comes up usually as number 2 only. And that it is there as a negative one is totally normal, because that's legacy. And we cannot expect that to disappear very quickly. But what we've seen, for instance, is the number of replies, open replies, where machine translation is identified as something positive, or at least as neutral, has increased exponentially over the last 3 years. And so the negatives are still there. But now, where we didn't see any positives before, we now see positives. So it's that type of thing that where we do take that type of input, not just the negative input, the complaints, but also the opinions about what is going well into account, and that gives us some information about how people are starting to think about these things. Also, what we're hearing here during the conference, it matches actually.
Thank you, Rudy. Before giving the floor to Annette, a quick question to Michael. According to what Nino Platel said, how random is your random sample?
Okay, that's a good question. And as we have already discussed here in our presentation, you have to be very, very careful with the interpretation of the data. For example, the finding we had about machine translation. And for us, it's often the question, which information really can people give us? Do they know the information? For example, do they know if their service providers use machine translation? Or if you ask people, like we have the same question, our annual survey, what do you think, how many people will you employ next year? So this is an expectation, but it depends on who you ask. So, and some people definitely can't give you the proper answer. And so for this, you have to have a good description who your sample are. And unfortunately, we are not a research institute. I like doing research, I come from research, but I also know the limitations we do have as an association, because what universities does in their research, or what research institutes like for elections also doing. So to have a real random sample is a really, really difficult procedure to select the random sample and to require the people and to define them. But what you can do to make your data really representative, or to have a feeling or a good, that you can to validate your findings, you have on the one hand to have a description who was in your sample, so you can describe your sample, and from that you can derive a feeling how reliable everything is. What we can't do is to say, okay, we select 50% from companies with a site like that, or 50% from companies. And the other thing is, you know, when you select random samples, you have to know which your influence factors are. For example, is it an influence if you ask women or men? Does it influence your answer? Or is the company size the critical success factor? And from our experience, I'm doing surveys for 15 years right now for Tekom. I know some critical influence factors, like the size of the company, for example, is one of it. So the position in the company, especially when you ask for what, for example, as I said before, do you think you will hire people next year? You have to ask the head of the departments and not the people who just are employees. So you can, if you know that, you can look for the proper questions for the proper target groups. And also what we defined here, the kind of the companies, if you ask service providers from translation industry, or if you have localization software companies and so on, this is often also a very important influence factors. And with it, you can see how valid your data are. And this is what you really can do to make your data more reliable, if you are not in that position to do it like the research usually does. This is very time-consuming and difficult in the end.
And I would like to add something. What I like with Daniela's figures is that some of them are really very stable over the years, and that shows the methodology and everything is sound. For instance, the members or the people who work in the field is around about 83,000, and it never changed, like one year 60,000, next year 80,000, and then 100,000. So that's very stable. And what's very good, we have timelines. So in some fields we can really see, because we repeat it and repeat it, we can see at the beginning we had maybe 15% of companies working with content management systems, and nowadays it's 45% who say they do that. So you can see the trends. And that's for us that's very important for us, to follow trends and see how certain technologies emerge, for instance. And that will be interesting with machine translation as well. So we'll be repeating that next year, ask basically the same people, and then we will see what they will be answering next year.
Thank you so much. So what I suggest is a EUATC survey on the Tekom trends on your evolution. I give the floor to Annette now.
Okay, sorry, not very technically minded. Okay, as chair of FIT Europe, clearly my remit is to speak about the translators, who are the subject, or I suppose the main focus is on translators in this survey. I'd like to say, first of all, when I worked in Germany many, many years ago, I worked for a large supplier to the automotive industry. I worked in the R&D department and was involved in the preparation of a lot of these documents you're speaking about, the product specifications, product requirements, brochures, etc., etc. And one thing strikes me between that work and then the expectations of how the translator should translate. There's huge collaboration goes into the preparation of the original document. It's in the department I worked in, there were 70 engineers, there was a director, there were 5 different departments. it was never any one person or one little department that worked on those documents. Am I doing something here? I'll repeat that question. My apologies. There's a question from somebody watching the session. And she says, can you please make the point that high earners' responses are filtered out, or are refused in such surveys, which skews the results? So could either of you comment?
Earners. So I don't really understand why only high earners. I could understand if the person would have asked, can you filter out the extremes, both high earners and very low earners, and look at the average? It's a good question, actually. At this moment, we don't. In the language industry survey, we have a number of profile questions. We start with a number of profile questions that are asking for the role of people, where they live, and things like that, and how they see themselves, whether they see themselves as a company or as an individual translator, for instance. So about 5 questions like that, and then we analyze the answers about the trends and the expectations and so on based on those profiles, so that we can distinguish between the different segments and different types of respondents. We are not asking for, at this moment, we are not asking for precise revenue figures. We ask them to put themselves in a range, and the lowest range is less than 25K per year, but it goes to above 20 million. Because the survey addresses both individuals and companies. So we do see, and one of the remarks that we had in the report this year, for instance, was that we saw quite a big chunk of individual translators below the 25K, which is normal in lower salary countries, but is not logical in Germany, for instance. So the only explanation, but we didn't ask the question, so I cannot be sure that it was the explanation, was that these people are not working full-time as translator, but which is plausible, but I cannot be 100% certain. So maybe that's something that we need to ask in the next year, just to be able to filter that doubt out. But,
Okay. Not to follow up on that, but because time is running on, I have a question to the floor. Is there anything you think we should be asking the industry and that we're not asking? Is there a gap there in the information all of the stakeholders need?
Annette, the industry, what do you mean? Our industry or industry as Michael understands it?
Sorry. I think Michael's industry is quite narrow anyway because they're working with technical writers, etc., compared to what we're all representing here. So let's say the stakeholders, from our point of view, the translators, the small LSPs, large LSPs, and anybody who uses freelance translators, DGT as well? What do we need to ask? Or a number of questions that will help or that will improve or give us an indication of you know, what we can do better in the future.
Okay. Yeah, just introduce yourselves, just say who you are.
Hello, Dragos Ciobanu from the University of Leeds. Can I make the point that, apart from asking any new questions, perhaps when presenting the results, it would be quite helpful to give a bit more detail. For example, we are quite interested to see the skills gap and the perception of the skills gap between the graduates we produce, and what the companies need. And in the survey, that's sometimes actually going up. However, when it comes to the question about the awareness of the European Masters in Translation, and especially whether that this label is taken into account when hiring new staff, the results show that 13% constantly for the last 2 years of companies take this label into account. So we're in a bit of a situation here where prospective students might be reading this survey saying, universities aren't doing their job, I'm not getting the right training for it. Companies are complaining that the graduates that they hire don't have enough skills, but at the same time they really don't care about the developments that the universities are putting in. So just presenting the findings of these questions totally separately and not trying to explain or break it down a tiny bit, I'm not sure it's helping companies reach their goal, universities reach their goal, and I take that as an endorsement. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, point taken. If I remember well, actually, the feedback about the skills of new graduates was not that bad. Well, no. If you ask people and you talk to them, yes, that's the feedback that you're getting from companies. That's not really what they need. But if you look at the actual results in the survey, they were higher than I expected personally. What I totally agree about awareness of the EMT label, that has not moved 1 inch over the last couple of years. So, but little bit, okay, little bit. But definitely not where you would want to be. But that's something about, I would say, PR and marketing of the EMT universities in that case. But I thought that, well, it is definitely an important question that we need to ask and need to continue to ask to the companies, whether that level of skills, of the various types of skills, is improving or not. But I thought it was not that bad, actually, at this moment.
Yeah, I'd like to add something for Dragos. I think we have to live with that gap, both universities and companies, because what I've learned in the past 5 years, in particular through LA Exchange and meeting with universities, is that there's something that will never change. That is to say, the industry, in the meaning that, well, not Michael's meaning, but our meaning, our sector moves too fast for the academic world. So there will always be this gap, and the aim is to reduce it, but to be aware that, well, this is going too fast for the university to adapt in real time. So it's.
I was just going to say that if that's the case, then the companies need to bear part of the responsibility of universities recruiting fewer and fewer students. Yeah. Because the students will look at such the end result, and they will not trust the university if the university comes out not in a favorable light. But I see your point, but then this is the situation.
But then you need to, well, universities, and I think they, need to show that they collaborate with companies, and that's it.
I'm sorry, I have only just one last question from a lady over there, because then we have to run for the break, because at 11:30 we have the Commissioner Oettinger speaking. So, very, very last question. Sorry for this time.
I have a question for the people from the manufacturing industry and Tekom, Michael and Daniela. You say that from your surveys you see emerging technologies. Do you have any idea or any results or people interested in a speech translation that is currently being developed with money from the European Commission both in Paris and Karlsruhe? Because in fact, what is the NMT in Paris at the European Language Resources Group, and in Karlsruhe, in the Karlsruhe Institute for Technology, they are working to put an extra layer on NMT that is text-to-speech, so that we have automated interpreting. So speech translation is not about written translation, but spoken translation. The first experiments were for Bulgarian under the Bulgarian EU presidency, and now for German under the Austrian presidency. And it's quite amazing what is happening. So these robot...
Sorry, we need only a question. We have no time for explanations or expressions. So.
Yeah.
Do the companies that you work with look forward to these robot interpreters or not?
We don't have statistical data on this yet, but I know we have, when you come to some of our conferences, chatbots are big. That's the hype at the moment, where everybody speaks about. But they usually they work with a screen output, not with text-to-speech yet. Text-to-speech is maybe the next step when the basic thing works. And I'm sure we will be seeing that in some years, but not now.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to go for the break, and thank you so much for participating. Thank you.